Each year, the Diversity Committee at the Louis D. Brandeis School of Law at the University of Louisville hosts events that help law students to remember why they are indeed critical thinkers. These conversations are necessary as we continue to explore the issues that impact all of us. I'm Dean Coel, the Assistant Dean for Student Affairs and Diversity, and I am thrilled to be here. I am the co-chair of the Diversity Committee. Welcome to Banned and Dangerous, how the growing movement to censor books will impact the legal community and the overall community at large. We want to explore the implications of present-day book banning, and to give a warm welcome, here is our amazing leader of this fine law school, Dean and Professor of Law, Melanie B. Jacobs. Dean Jacobs.
Thank you. I am so grateful to our speakers. I am so grateful to all of you. This is incredibly important. As I think about the role of lawyers, right, why you're here, why we're here, lawyers should be the citizens in our community who can help us lead difficult conversations, challenging conversations, respectful conversations. And it is so valuable that we have the chance to come together and be able to do that. It is important, too, that we make sure that all diverse perspectives are aired and heard. This could not be a more important topic. We don't want to stifle education. We don't want to stifle access. And I am very, very grateful that our speakers will be able to talk more about the importance of access to everything. So thank you. I want to get to the conversation. And thank you, Robin.
Thank you, Dean Jacobs. Thank you so much. Now it's my pleasure to introduce an expert in legal bibliography and the co-chair, a wonderful co-chair of the Diversity Committee, Professor Robin Harris, who will introduce one of the books that will be discussed today and the members of the Diversity Committee. Professor Harris.
Thank you, Dean Coel. Recently, this book, Gender Queer, by cartoonist Maya Kobabe, has been the subject of a lot of controversy. It was targeted for removal from Jefferson County school libraries by a conservative parent whose child attends a Jefferson County public school. Gender Queer is not a required text. It is a memoir about a non-binary person's identity. A group of educators and parents with final say over library challenges at JCPS met, and in less than 4 minutes, voted unanimously to keep Gender Queer on library shelves. I believe that Mr. Hartman was an observer at that meeting. Maybe he'll talk more about that later. Books like this one and books on critical race theory have been the catalyst for several recent policies in Florida, Missouri, and other states. These policies and the book bans are the impetus for our discussion today. It's been my honor to be on the Diversity Committee since its inception about 30 years ago, and I've worked with many wonderful colleagues here and wonderful students, and this year it's no exception. I want to tell you all who the people on the committee are this year. Constitutional law and civil rights expert, Professor Sam Markison. International law and immigration law expert, Professor Enid Trucios-Haynes. Interim clinic director and visiting professor of law, Hen Sheth. Assistant dean for admissions, Dean Nick Stiglmeyer. Third-year law student and Student Bar Association Community Relations Chair, Rachel Boots. Third-year law student and Black Law Students Association President, Lauren Neal, and she's also the SBA Diversity Chair. And finally, Professor Lauren Rosti, an expert on disability law and many other things, I might add. Laura is retiring after 20-plus years of service as a professor and as our former dean from 2000 to 2005. We dedicate today's program to Laura. She will be missed.
Thank you so much, Professor Harris. I know we will miss her, won't we? She was great. She was great. Your moderator is the Student Bar Association Diversity Chair and President of BALSA, as Professor Harris just said. She's from Indianapolis, Indiana, and hopes to have a career in environmental justice law. I give you all 3L, Lauren Neal.
Thank you, Dean Dwell, and thank you, Professor Harris. Recent controversies about books that explore critical race theory and LGBTQIA community discussed through this panel and will be discussed through this panel of distinguished community leaders and scholars. Your first panelist is a thoughtful, well-known, and well-informed member of the Jefferson County Board of Education and elected representative from District 1, where she has lived her entire life. They are also a member of the University of Louisville Board of Trustees. She graduated from the Jefferson County School System and University of Louisville. She is a life member of the Louisville Urban League and the NAACP. She was a leadership Louisville Bingham Fellow, and 2020 Governor Beshear appointed her to serve as the University of Louisville Board of Trustees. Here is well-respected educator who has been an advocate for students and families, Ms. Diane Porter. Joining her is an active professional who serves as the first director of Kentucky's Fairness Campaign and steering committee member of the Fairness Coalition. Over the years, he has helped quadruple the number of Kentucky cities with anti-discrimination LGBTQ+ fairness ordinances. He was a press secretary for Congressman John Yarmouth and the Philadelphia director of Democratic National Committee's Open Air Grassroots campaign for the 2004 presidential election. He was named Partner of the Year for Louisville Convention from the Louisville Convention Bureau, and he is a formed Aladdin Ford Fellow and LGBTQ Fellow of Rockwood Leadership Institute. He has a Master's of Arts degree from Washington University in St. Louis. Please welcome a leader with a record of service to humankind, Mr. Chris Hartman. Our final member of this distinguished panel is an expert in civil rights, civil procedure, and employment law. She is a national radio and TV legal analyst with appearances on MSNBC, CNN, Dr. Phil, News Station, and several other national media outlets. She has worked at the Charles Hamilton Houston Institute for Race and Justice at Harvard Law School for over 8 years, where she has conducted national empirical legal studies that explore issues of access and equity in education, employment, and criminal law. At Harvard, she helped write the curriculum for anti-bias workshops. She's often invited as a keynote speaker for events and was an expert witness for the Indiana Advisory Committee to the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. She has received numerous fellowships and awards, including the prestigious University of Louisville's Distinguished Faculty Award. She's received her PhD from Illinois State University, where she was inducted into the Hall of Fame, and her Juris Doctor from Washington University School of Law. Every summer, she serves as a great lecturer at Columbia University, where she teaches law and ethics. Please welcome Brandeis Scholar, Professor, and Dr. Laura McNeil. All right, let's get going. Recently, the American Liberty Association report found that most school texts are being challenged are written by people of color or individuals from the LGBTQIA plus community. Genderqueer was not banned, but how do we explain the recent efforts by the state to control the content of speech? The exclusion of certain speech from the marketplace of ideas by the state because it disfavors the content and speaker, is it constitutionally prohibited? So how are these efforts by the state to ban books any different? Starting anywhere.
It's all right, I'll jump in. It's interesting that this is happening, Lauren, because it's well established, right, by it's a Supreme Court case, Board of Education versus PICO, that school officials operating as a state cannot regulate the content of school books for the purposes of promoting some type of political ideology, religious ideology. They can indoctrinate students, right? But it also means that it shouldn't be used, as we're seeing it now, as a means to manipulate the First Amendment freedom of speech to do exactly what that Supreme Court case said you shouldn't do, which is not to regulate content simply based on your own personal affiliations or belief systems. And so what we've seen is this pattern in practice. Now, Florida has passed a law, Kansas has passed a law allowing for these banning of books under the guise of, well, it's explicit, or it's sexually explicit, or pornographic. And the reality is, prior to these laws being passed, these books have been in schools for years. And so really what we're seeing is a very, in my opinion, strategic and deliberate effort to ban any book that doesn't align with conservative values. And I think it's a danger to our democracy, and it's an extreme disservice to our students. Watch you grab. We there?
St. Louis, though.
Exactly. It's okay, Sloop.
Okay, all right.
Say bye.
Hi, all. I'm Chris, Executive Director of the Fairness Campaign. I use he, him pronouns. I'm not a lawyer, I should say, but I am the Fairness Campaign's lobbyist in Frankfurt. And at the very least, I can talk to where this trend has come from the queer literature perspective. That this is all sort of spiraling since marriage became legal in 2015. Conservatives lost major ground at this point. I mean, this was the political wedge issue for about a decade or so. And we look back to when Kentucky voted on marriage not terribly long ago. It was 2004. And spoiler alert, we lost big time. We weren't even voting whether we were going to legalize marriage or not. We were voting on a constitutional amendment, which I'm sure you all are aware. We have some on the ballot this year, specifically related to abortion, Amendment 2. I will say vote no on Amendment 2. But in 2004, we voted 75% to 25% to update Kentucky's constitution to say same-sex marriage is forever banned in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. And that's still in the state constitution today. It's meaningless now, thanks to Obergefell, but it is still in black and white in the state constitution today. Marriage is between one man and one woman in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. So when they lost their key wedge issue in 2015, evangelical conservatives, they had to find a way to make up ground. And so they tried a few different things. First, it was transgender bathroom access. And that failed miserably. Many folks will remember in North Carolina, they passed a really restrictive ban on trans folks using bathrooms that match their gender identity. And they had a huge fallout. Concerts withdrew, the NCAA pulled tournament out. Louisville actually got an ACC baseball championship tournament because North Carolina lost it. So big fallout there. So bathrooms didn't work. We actually had the dubious distinction in Kentucky of being the first state to face and then ultimately defeat a trans bathroom ban focused on school-aged children. So it didn't work. So they moved to trans access to playing on sports teams. And that is what we've seen over the past 3 years. And this is, I'm not telling you all something you don't know. This is a well-funded, nationally coordinated effort to have some victories in a couple of states on these wedge issues, on trans sports, which now, we banned one 12-year-old girl from playing sports in Kentucky, and every conservative politician has it on their postcard that they're mailing into districts in the Republican Party as if it was the biggest challenge facing Kentucky this entire year. And so now the next step after trans sports is banning curriculum. And of course, we saw too, not just LGBTQ curriculum, but this year was really the year for critical race theory bills, as folks saw. Now, was critical race theory being taught in public schools? No, I wish it were, but right, it wasn't. But this is, again, finding what polls well to galvanize a very vocal segment of conservative voters to use in political campaigns and literally for almost nothing else. Now, the true believers do think that if you ban children under a certain age from learning about critical race theory or learning that LGBTQ people exist, that you will somehow prevent them from engaging in the world experience, that there are queer people and they might be queer, and that there are people of different races, and we have to respect and understand that racism is the underpinning of so much of the injustice of the fabric of America. But, this is just another step towards what can we find to divide the voting base, to galvanize our conservative voters and to use in our political campaigns? And it's definitely already here in Kentucky, but it's definitely coming more in Kentucky, as we'll talk about in a bit.
I just quickly want to say, as it pertains to K through 12 children going to school, that it's very important that we don't close the door for literature. And it is, as you say, it's a timely issue that has come before us. But according to the First Amendment, our students have the opportunity and the right to read. And we would never put anything in place that is inappropriate. But as a parent, they have a right to question the books. So we have a process in place that we saw, that you saw, that we went through step by step. But still, there's concern when the committee unanimously said, we will keep the book. And I think there was some misunderstanding and miscommunication. Everybody did not have the book. Libraries are there for students for books to be available. But we should not limit the materials that are in our library. So it was the first time that I can remember that we had such a heated discussion. But the process worked in that a parent goes directly to the local school principal. The principal makes a decision, then it can go to the district, to the superintendent, but then there is a committee that goes through all the book process. So we did that. We had a hearing where we had the director of our library services talk about how books get there. And I think there's a misconception that every book that we put on the library is read by somebody. I don't know when and how that could happen. So if you have some volunteer time and you want to read some books, let us know. But the process is a clean process on purpose. And unfortunately it happened, but fortunately the decision was that the students have the opportunity to have access to the book.
May I elaborate? She just made a really good point that I think is important to augment, is the misperception that is being pushed forth that simply by having these books available in the library, that your child is going to read this book. The whole concept behind the First Amendment marketplace of ideas is just that, to have a marketplace of diverse ideas and perspectives. And so it's very important as these types of panels and messaging is getting out there, that it's accurate messaging, accurate branding, because, and not for political means, as he did such an eloquent job of emphasizing. And that's why it's so disturbing to me, this notion that, you know, teachers are pushing certain books on students. No, they're not. I've been a K-12 teacher. I'm friends with a lot of K-12 teachers. All teachers want to do is help students achieve their best academic potential. And in order to do that, you have to have materials and libraries that reflect the diverse society in which we live. And if you're giving students a skewed perspective of what the real world looks like, you're doing them a disservice. And so I think it's very important as you go out into the world and perhaps have conversations about this, that you give the correct branding and messaging, the accurate message, which is they're not trying to indoctrinate students, meaning schools trying to give them access to diverse perspectives. To the contrary, they're trying to open their minds to be more inclusive. Thanks.
Thank you. With several students teaching law at high schools like Central High, what is the role of active citizens in ensuring free speech in public education context? A function of the First Amendment is to allow for free exchange of ideas so that we have well-informed and engaged citizenry. Has the state underestimated the abilities of its own students to learn, critically analyze, and come to their conclusions? Are there differences in K-12 through higher education?
I'll start with K through 12, and thank you for the law students that have been to Central High School. And since we're giving praise, I would like to praise Dr. Laura Rothstein, because she was there when we opened the door on the law and government class and has been with us every step of the way. Without her guidance, we would not be at the level we are now. So thank you, and thank you again. And as it pertains to having law students be there, I cannot think of a better student to be there to work with high school students, because you have been through school, but you also are in law school and can bring another dimension to the education that is being given out in the class. And as it pertains to students, having the opportunity to work with others is extremely important in today's world. And we are asking for volunteers all the time, so we very much appreciate the help that we have gotten from the Brandeis School of Law with your students. And what I have learned in life is that a high school student will talk to you quicker than they'll talk to me, just because, you know, there's this thing called age, but they still talk to me anyway. But they should have the opportunity to have the conversation with a student that is going forward in law and government. So I think that it is very beneficial to the education of our students. And as we have others that come into our schools to volunteer time, whether it's medical time or whatever the case may be, it's always helpful for a student to see a person in the real world that is doing the real work, as well as the teacher that's presenting the information to them. That's my opinion as we talk about K through 12, and a thank you to the Brandeis School of Law.
You know, I think about it as students have a right to an education that is comprehensive and developed by educators and not politicians. And we say this a lot, lobbying the Capitol. Not that anybody ever hears us, because the politicians want to be doctors, they want to be educators, the ones that aren't lawyers want to be lawyers. They get to play all sorts of things when they're on the floor of the General Assembly here in Kentucky or in the Capitol in DC. But at the end of the day, aside from students having a right to a comprehensive education, I'm specifically talking about saving lives. That queer youth that cannot see themselves represented in media, cannot see themselves represented in literature, cannot see themselves represented in role models in the school system. Because, you know, we had a bit of a phase where I think teachers felt very comfortable to come out in the school setting, and that era is over. You know, we've seen a couple of instances here in Kentucky of teachers being pushed out because they're embracing their own LGBTQ identity or because they're supporting LGBTQ youth. You know, the bills that are being proposed now, and you all may have seen in the national news, there's a federal version of Florida's Don't Say Gay bill that's been introduced in Congress that would, you know, prohibit really talking about anything related to LGBTQ identities, a third grade and lower, which means that if I've got two parents of the same sex, I can't talk about my parents in school. You know, this is the type of thing that the other side has been looking to do and having success in doing. And by erasing queer representation in the public school setting, you are creating a dangerous environment for queer youth. And again, nothing you all don't know, the disproportionately higher rates of depression, self-harm, and suicidality amongst queer youth, but particularly trans youth and gender non-binary youth, queer youth who really are not seeing themselves represented in media. And to focus on, you know, 10 books probably. There are probably a list of about 10 books, but of course, this one is at the top of it. But there are a number of them that are on the list, are really specifically about trans identity, about queer identity, and about non-binary identity, our most marginalized and least represented population. And so it's a really divisive attack that, again, I don't think most politicians really care that much about. They care about the media that it gets them, and they care about putting it on their postcard and the votes that it gets them. But it is just a few of these think tanks that are really committed to LGBTQ erasure, that are orchestrating, they're the architects of this plan to disseminate in all of our states around the nation. And, you know, I know we'll be talking more about the attacks that we expect to come here. I watch West Virginia very closely because, very similar to us, they had defeated every anti-LGBTQ bill in recent memory. We'd killed every one of them in a decade until this year when the trans sports bill gained so much national momentum that when I saw West Virginia fold last year and pass the bill, I knew Kentucky was going to do it this year.
I'm going to address the first part of your question, what can everyday citizens do? And I think what's important is remembering that your voice counts, your voice matters. And what I mean by that is I encourage every student in here, as well as, you know, your family members, even if you don't have kids in the local school district, you have a right as a public citizen, as a member of that community, to show up at the school board meetings. You have the right to be involved in the process of what happens, what kind of decisions are being made in your community. And I think it's important, you know, as was stated here on the panel, most school districts have a process in place to give parents a chance to challenge books as whether they're appropriate, age appropriate, sexually explicit, you know, pornographic, whatever the case may be. But there's a system in place, and you have a right to participate in that system. And so I think what really needs to happen is we have to challenge these head on. Not, again, it doesn't matter if you have a child in the community, but the law is very clear. These books cannot be taken out of libraries, right? Censorship cannot occur unless it is, again, as stated in some of the laws, it has to be pornographic. It has to be not age appropriate. Well, if you're not there to make the argument that this is silliness and this is really driven by politics, then a lot of these books are being banned. And so I think you don't want the loudest voice in your community to be the one that decides whether or not you're going to live in an inclusive community or not, and whether your children in your community are going to feel welcome and included in the school districts. And so I think it's very important to get involved, and more important to encourage your family members and friends as well. And again, you all are just in law school, but you are training to be the change that we want to see in the world, and you have the power to start that change today in your communities.
Thank you. This question is more for Mr. Hartman. Even though the effort to ban genderqueer failed here in Jefferson County, we know that that's not going to be the end of the story. Based on your work in Frankfurt, what do you anticipate the General Assembly might do in this with this issue in 2023? I think you kind of touched on it, but.
Oh, what aren't they going to do? But, you know, my outlook was so much clearer and brighter several years ago, and even before this most recent legislative session. The Fairness Campaign, we have an endorsing body called CFAIR. It's our political action committee. And we have built some really intentional and difficult relationships with politicians, electeds on both sides of the aisle, some of whom are not with us on every issue, but were willing to stand with us on LGBTQ rights to a point. And this year that point was reached. So when virtually everyone, you know, except for the Democrats, which are very few in the state legislature. You don't know our numbers in the General Assembly. We've got 75 Democrats in the state House, and 25 Democrats in the state House and 75 Republicans. And in the state Senate, it's 8 Republicans and 8 Democrats and 30 Republicans. We see how wide these margins are. So even our allies that we had worked closely with to kill bills that would have eliminated the fairness ordinances in the 24 cities where we've got them, those local LGBTQ discrimination protections that you know, would give broad authority to any business to, you know, claim to be a religious service and to deny service to folks. We've killed so many bills that deal with the medical profession and anybody being able to deny service based on a religious or a philosophical belief. We worked hard with conservatives to stop all of this. But everybody got in line, unfortunately, against the trans sports bill. And what that, you know, made it impossible for the Fairness Campaign to do was to continue to endorse elected officials who voted to ban trans girls from playing on sports teams in Kentucky. And what this means is that some of the friends that we have traditionally relied on are likely not going to be there for us in 2023. Aside from those, a lot of them lost their primaries to more conservative Republicans in northern Kentucky. And then there are more retirements than I'd care to list, and unfortunately some deaths. We lost probably 80% of our allies that I would have considered moderate Republicans in the Kentucky General Assembly this year. And that means that everything is fair game next year. And that if you get the Fairness Campaign's emails or updates, you will get more of them from January to March of next year, as everything is going to be a real threat this time. The Don't Say Gay, Don't Say Trans bill is definitely coming. It'll come in several different forms. Some of it will be about banning books and banning literature in curriculum. Some of it will be about specifically you can't teach or talk about LGBTQ folks in certain grade levels. Some of these bills will be combined. Some of them will be separate. There'll probably be 4 or 5 versions of the same thing. So we will have to track which one is moving, which one isn't, who's got the most support to make it happen in both chambers. And that's just on the school stuff. We will surely be facing the medical care bans again. We will surely be facing threats to the fairness ordinances again. Gender-affirming care for youth. You've seen other states criminalize both physicians and parents who will support their LGBTQ youth. And in some states, as you've seen, they're not even waiting for the state legislature to pass these types of laws. They're doing this through cabinet actions at the Cabinet for Health and Family Services or through executive actions from the governor's office that is allowing for the investigation of families and physicians that will support trans youth. All of these bills are coming to the Kentucky General Assembly in 2023. They start the first week of January and they'll go through the end of March. It's only a 30-day session, which is our only saving grace. It goes 30 days, 60 days, 30 days, 60 days. So this is the short session. So hopefully some shiny object will catch their attention and they will focus on that or several of that more than they will focus on anti-LGBTQ efforts or critical race theory efforts. But they are absolutely coming and they are a serious threat this year.
Thank you. Okay.
Books being there or not being there, as I have stated, there is a process. And if people feel that we have been told to take something off and it's not off, then there's a process that we have to go through. I think we could do so much more working together as opposed to being argumentative so much of the time. Let's work through the process. Let's acknowledge something that we think is a concern and acknowledge it so that it gets worked on. It's extremely important, though, that there is a First Amendment, that we talk about our students now and our adults going through the pandemic and the mental health issues that we're dealing with. All of these things come together as we talk about how we can do our work best. And the term sense of belonging, to not acknowledge people, students and adults where they are, that is inappropriate in the United States of America, but I understand that there are issues in place. But when I was a teacher and what I do as an adult, it's very important to have good relationships. And relationships build better students, build better opportunities. So I think that we have to be very focused on not taking the sense of belonging away from students and acknowledging individuals. We are all individuals. We have all had our individual battles in life that we have gone through. And my concern is that we don't go backward in life. We have marched, we have done many things. It's very important for our students that they have quality education and that we meet the needs of every student. It's not, my favorite saying, it's not one size fits all, but it's our responsibility in public education to meet the needs of every student.
Absolutely. Also, I think I'm going to tackle this from a systemic level, since that's kind of my area of research. I think realistically, Lauren, people are not always going to follow the rules. I mean, I'm guilty. I have ran the red light when I shouldn't have, trying to make it through with the yellow light when I know I should yield. It's kind of part of human nature, right? Sometimes good people make poor decisions. Maybe they're so passionate about this book, they want it to remain or they want it out. Whichever the case may be, I think that's a perfect rationale or argument or advocacy for the Department of Education for every state needs to be more involved. We need to have periodic audits to ensure that decisions that are made by a system that is in place, a transparent, fair system that's in place to determine which books are allowed, which ones are not. And we need to just do periodic audits and go through the libraries and make sure those books are still there. Make sure that people aren't circumventing democracy, because that's what it is, and going around the will of the people, meaning the decision that was made by the board with public feedback, meaning parents and concerned citizens. So I think it's a great disservice for the Department of Education to kind of take this laissez-faire approach to these issues that are so important. I mean, when you're talking about something as fundamental as our education system that is training the future leaders of America, the future teachers, doctors, lawyers, managers, sales associates, whomever they might be, you want them to have the best education possible. And one thing that I still find very embarrassing about the United States is that for us to be one of the greatest countries in the world, we still are ranked so low in terms of the quality of education our children are receiving. And a very important element or factor in the quality of education is access to resources. And the resources are, part of those resources are the books that are available in the library. And so I think really for this to really work in the way that it's intended to, meaning for schools to the greatest extent possible to be a marketplace of ideas, to uphold the tenets and fundamental principles of the First Amendment, we have to have a higher level of accountability. We have to have more layers of accountability in place to ensure that, as Lauren said, people are not removing books or placing books in the library that the decision was made to do the alternative.
Thank you. Is there potential that individuals will not want to serve on school boards or committees to consider book issues because of the volatility of reactions to their work? If so, what can be done about that?
Run.
Wow. Well, from a school board member that will not get pushed out of my seat unless somebody says so in November, you have to approach the school board as work. It is not just showing up on Tuesday night for a board meeting. It's nonstop work. It's being in our schools. It's talking to our staff. It's talking to our students. I think that for people that do not like confrontation and things like that because it creates anxiety, it may cause some people to go away. I would like to say that it hasn't always been this way, but it has been this way, different ways for a long time. As we get people on the Board of Education that are focused on educating our students, we have to learn to make adjustments. The pandemic has taught us to make adjustments. People think that we make all the decisions. We do not. We refer to people that give us informed decisions. But I would hope that it does not take the desire of human beings to want to be board members. But as you raise your hand to be a board member, please stay focused on the quality needs of each and every child. So I don't know, we'll just have to do some research and watch over time to see what happens. But for this board member, it is my hope to stay in place to continue as we move forward with the new things that we have on our agenda. The primary thing is the student assignment plan as we move forward with that we, those of us that have studied it up to this time, that we stay focused, that it is implemented according to what we're going to do. But I think the whole idea of the anxiety, I think that does create some people to say, I don't want to. But we need good people on the boards of education. That's my sales pitch for today, please.
I would like to add that the politicization of the school boards has been a chief focus of our opponents, meaning anti-LGBTQ opponents, anti-critical race theory opponents, in the past, I'd say 3 years, probably, where we have seen arch conservatives mobilized to the school boards and to the school board meetings, I mean, not just here in Jefferson County, but across the nation, like seldom before in recent memory. You know, you look at the past, 10 years, 15 years of your school board meetings, were they ever as big as they have been in the past couple of years? No, of course not. And that's because they're pouring media and attention into, again, the politicization of the school boards and to candidates to take over the school boards. That has been a major push by our opponents who, once again, well-funded, coming from a national push to run really conservative candidates, get a few of them on the school board. And as any chair of a board can tell you, I imagine it only takes one or two folks to derail a lot of the work sometimes that the board is trying to do, can really eat up a lot of time, can eat up a lot of attention. And so this is a trend that we are seeing. I'm proud to say that we've been endorsing school board candidates for 30 years at the Fairness Campaign. We've always seen these races as pivotal and important in terms of setting the tone for the education of our children in the district. And I'm so proud that every time she has run, we have endorsed Diane Porter, and have done so again this year. Of course.
Is there a balance that can be struck between the First Amendment, the power of local school boards, and the rights of parents to raise their children as they see fit?
I'm going to say yes, there can be a balance. I feel like we have that balance when we follow the process that's in place. It's not as if parents don't have a say in what books are in their schools or to express concerns and saying, I have a concern about this textbook. The problem occurs is when we circumvent the process to try to, whether it's for some type of political agenda, religious agenda, with the critical race theory, race agenda, or anti-race agenda. That's, I think, where the problem lies. If we just follow the process, as our illustrious board member has so eloquently explained to us, that's in place, then we really wouldn't be having this panel, right, this discussion. The problem is individuals using the process or attempting to manipulate the process for alternative means that have nothing to do with the well-being of a child or inappropriate books, but more about a larger political agenda. And I want to just briefly state that, because it's been something that's been on my mind, this book banning issue is so much bigger than book banning in terms of the implications for First Amendment protections, the implications for democracy. I mean, when you look at and again, I'm going to play devil's advocate here just for a little while. Elon Musk wanting to buy Twitter and saying, you know what, I don't want people to be censored. I want to protect First Amendment speech, and so, I want to buy Twitter and there won't be any restrictions. You have reportedly Kanye West saying he wants to buy Parler for the same reasoning. And so in one sense, that type of advocacy supports how we all, at least I did in law school, learned about the First Amendment. I have First Amendment rights. I was quick to say that when visiting my parents. I can, they're like, whoa, not in this house, right? But we feel that very passionate about the First Amendment and the freedom of speech. But the reality is, even though the Constitution, or we hear in constitutional cases, this marketplace of ideas, there are limits, right? We can't yell fire in a theater. We can't, we can censor pornographic materials. And so I don't know if it's realistic for us to have, or even like the Elon Musk model, because, there are consequences sometimes when you don't censor the appropriate things, right, that might cause harm, such as yelling fire in a theater. But finding that balance between, yes, we want to carve out exceptions for the public good, but not allowing that to open Pandora's box, and now we're carving out exceptions for political gains. Now we're carving out exceptions for anti-Semitism, like whatever it is. And so I think the key to all of this, in my humble opinion, is having a transparent process in play, which we have, a transparent process for evaluating the appropriateness of books, and honoring that process, just like we honor and respect the rule of law. There are so many cases I cover, and I'm like, this makes no sense. This judge's ruling is not an accurate application of the law. But there's a human side to the law as we learn, as we proceed forward in terms of judges being very transparent about, or some judges, having biases based on their lived experiences, not intentional, but those biases create a lens on which how we view the world, and judges aren't exempt to that. Parents, as we see in these meetings, are not exempt to that. And so I think if we really focus on, again, the process, honoring the process, protecting the process, and the brave actors facilitating the process, that's how we ensure that our children's education systems aren't being used for political tools or political, to gain some type of political advantage. And I think we really have to work hard to honor and protect that process in place. That's how we have the balance that you're referencing.
Anything to add, panelists? So at this point, we're going to open up questions to the audience. If anyone has any questions. Rachel?
So I do have a question. I know that the only way to squash bigotry and ignorance is education, and I feel like that in the schools is the best way to start. So what do you see, what do you project, I guess, as far as students not being aware of race issues and members of the LGBTQ community? How do you see that going forward without the exposure to different people?
I think it's important as we talk about school, students in school, that we have to teach the history of our country and our city. And I think that has created a lot of conversation when we start using the term critical race theory. We teach history of all races in education, and that's important to know what happened not only in Louisville, Kentucky, but what has happened not only in the United States, but it's our responsibility in educating that we give a full education to our students. So there are many stories to be told, and there will always be stories to be told, but that is a part of education. It's historic, it's what has happened, and things happen, and then what happens after, what's the next step after these things have happened. So it's the responsibility of public education to provide quality, meaningful education along the way. That's my personal opinion. I'm not in charge of curriculum, but I think it's life. If we are preparing students for life, we have to be fair, and we have to teach history and the present and what has happened as we go forward. And I say that because, as we have talked about boards of education, we have been told that there is a national effort to really take over the boards of education so that some of the work that has been done may not continue. So I think it's very important to teach the history, to teach the truth, and to talk about what has come from the things that have happened historically as we move forward.
The other side of the coin is that there are several states that have passed laws that mandate the inclusion of true history of racism in America, and LGBTQ identities and history mandate that be taught in public schools. And so there's going to be a disproportionate disadvantage of young people who come up in education systems in states like ours and in states in the South, because, still most of it, shockingly, concentrated in the South, where we see these restrictive bills about teaching about racism in America and teaching about queer identity. And as they enter into the world and enter into the workforce, enter into a national and especially an international workforce, they're not going to have the knowledge, the history, and in some degrees, the emotional intelligence that other students have gained by a fully inclusive curricula. And unfortunately, we're going to see the ramifications of that for generations to come in states like ours, where politicians have decided that they know what's best over educators.
Yes.
How do you guys deal with, or maybe not deal with, what are all of your opinions on the outlook of parents of younger children when it comes to their education and the things that they should and shouldn't be taught. Let's say, I think we kind of touched on it earlier in the seminar, but from like 3rd grade down, like down to kindergarten, I think that's still, I view it as kind of like a formative time in children's lives where they haven't so much been impressed upon by the educational system quite yet. Like I remember from my time in those grades, we were making macaroni art and I was learning how to do 2 + 2, and I wasn't really exploring the history of the world quite yet. It was still just learning how to talk to my friends and respect my teachers and things like that. So I feel like parents aren't quite ready to hand off their children to this wider educational experience quite yet. So how do you view the parents who have issues with book banning, things like that, for their younger age kids versus like once these kids get into the educational experience? Sorry, that was kind of a long-winded question, but.
The process is consistent, K through 12, that I have mentioned. That process is consistent. One of the things that I think that we must do is communicate more to parents as the students are coming into the system, what the curriculum is going to look like, and talk about it so that there's a better understanding of it. And what I know is curriculum changes. It can change because of what happens in Frankfurt. It can change because of what may happen by way of the Kentucky Department of Education, but also it may change because there's a need. That's why in most school districts you will see a chief academic officer that will look at the academic component, but then there's teaching and learning along the way. So one of the things that, and I think everybody thinks that everybody learns from Facebook, Twitter, and all those kinds of things. I am old enough to say that everybody doesn't do that. So let's have some real conversations and bring people in and make them not only comfortable, but to share what we're doing, but to ask for their feedback, to see what it is that they like and what they might be uncomfortable with. I think that we can enhance the learning that we provide by listening and communicating more at all levels. And I love kindergarten and pre-kindergarten. And sometimes, actually, we can learn from the students because they're quite honest. It's what I have learned in my life.
I think you made a good point. Based on the research I've done and the conversations I've had, there is a greater concern nationally, meaning if you look at the numbers for the younger age that you just identified as opposed to kids in high school. And some parents feel like they want more time to instill their own value system, whatever that might be, in their children. And so I just want to acknowledge, I think that's an excellent point that you've made. I do think that even still, I remember at my niece's school, kindergarten, they had a book about a penguin, they have like the little read aloud, and there were 2 girl penguins, 2 moms, right? And a parent being upset when her little girl came home, and they sent a letter home to my brother and say, this book, there's created some controversy, and that parent feeling, as these hypothetical you presented, I don't want my child introduced to that young. Not my place to judge those parents. The Constitution is very clear about parenting your children, but they also, it's a public education, it's free. They're welcome to enroll their child in a Catholic school, Montessori, whatever works for what they're trying to accomplish. But I do think there is a hypersensitivity at a younger age as opposed to high school. So, excellent point. I'm glad you brought that up.
Any other questions?
Let's go Norma first.
So one thing that comes to mind when I look at all of the laundry list of, different legislative acts that are coming up specifically related to LGBTQ issues, but as well as book banning, which includes a lot more, a wider range of discriminatory thought. I'm wondering, it feels like it's a bunch of fires that, a few people are trying to put out, and it's just impossible for this divided group of people that are trying to work toward making sure that these discriminatory practices don't become law, are unable to handle within the legal system that we're dealing with. It took decades for the judiciary to start looking
I mean, I don't know that I've got nothing for this, except that you're absolutely right, and God knows when it could possibly happen. I mean, it's one of those things like, Congress. Now, I mean, if would even Democrats support, campaign finance reform across the board? I don't know. The margins are so narrow, even after the election, if they retain control. It's like those are the core issues that none of the electeds ever want to be involved in. And I never see any movement in Frankfurt for any of that. I mean, there's no discussion at all. But I mean, most of the campaign finance stuff, is looking at Washington. And I mean, it's failed for decades. Like, it's like you have to send a whole new group of people there that have a different set of values. And I just can't imagine what the unraveling it's going to take to make that happen.
I guess they'll just get there on the merits, get there on the merits of being who they are and appealing to a public that wants to vote them into office and not, this,
Yeah.
fundamental unfairness that exists.
But it's all fiery 30-second talking points. Those aren't attractive talking points. The attractive talking points are what activate people's emotions and motivate them to go vote for these folks. That's the complication of our system, and I don't know.
Yeah, I think, and I'm trying not to be Debbie Downer, because I feel bad. I want to inspire you, and I do think I try to look at things. Hopefully, you've seen on my panel responses from a systemic level, because although I think it's important to be an advocate on all levels, I'm always trying to look at how can we get the greatest reach in terms of reform, and so. I think it just goes back to the very basics, which is leadership, who's voted into office. There is I think Congress on both sides right now is devoid of character and integrity, and we see that, and people are willing to sell their soul to stay in power, to stay in office, and it'll take one person at a time, people like you to run for office, but the problem is that doesn't help in the meantime with individuals that are suffering or having the adverse effects of these types of bias and discriminatory behaviors. And so I think you just have to take a targeted approach, but leadership really matters. Just as something as rudimentary as who our dean is, right? Having a dean like Dean Jacobs that embraces diversity and inclusion, that embraces equity and on all levels, right? And so leadership, and then that trickles down into having programs like this, and hopefully there are people in the room that we have inspired or changed their minds in some way that might have felt very differently coming into the room, which also goes back to education, right? Our children, I think, here's a piece of encouragement I'll give you. Statistics have overwhelmingly shown that this is it's largely a generational issue. And the younger generation are much more supportive and embrace inclusion and diversity issues. And so sometimes change takes time, and there is hurt during that time, but change will come. I mean, we have made strides beyond measure. I mean, to my understanding, I'm the 4th Black female faculty tenured here, and the university's been here for hundreds of years, right? And so change comes. It comes slowly, but it's coming. And so I would say stay encouraged. The fact that you're going to be out there with the legal tools, because that's the other key. Knowing your legal rights, knowing that you can actually be a real advocate and help change happen, hopefully will inspire and encourage you. So that's the best I can give you, because it's a multifaceted issue on multiple levels, as you eloquently pointed out. But we still, every step in the right direction is progress, and so we can't let that derail us. Otherwise, we'll start, as you say, history tends to repeat itself, right? So those are my thoughts.
Do you still have a question?
So I want to piggyback off of his comment from one of the comments that Professor Neal said. So I think that it is a difficult question in a lot of ways when we start talking about, parents who are sending their kids to first grade at public school that have certain concerns, and then obviously the other concern of wanting open-minded people who are inclusive of different ideas and give each idea of respect. And so another sort of hot button political issue that I sort of want to present to the panel is, do you think that school voucher programs contribute to or harm the current situation with respect to that? So the obvious response in a lot of ways, if you do have a kid and in whatever way you feel that speaking, getting the kids who don't want to encounter the stuff that's being pushed out, does that solve the problem, or does it make it worse by dividing up the younger generation? I hope that question makes sense and sort of really open-ended. Because I know that's a really contested issue with school vouchers and that sort of thing, so.
Yeah, not on my taxpayer dollars. I mean, yeah, I see this as a core problem. You shouldn't have the ability to send your child to a place that is not going to welcome all students, not going to welcome all families, not going to respect all students and families on my taxpayer's dime. You have the ability to do that on your dime if you want to, but if you're going to start using public money for private education that is blatantly and explicitly discriminatory, that's an abuse of taxpayer dollars, as far as I'm concerned.
My students know I love to play devil's advocate, so I'm gonna play devil's advocate and say, and again, not necessarily my honest perspective, but you know, that's a great idea, because, you know, we're in America, right? And I don't want my children being exposed to that particular curriculum. I pay tax dollars just like, you can argue back, it's okay.
Sure.
I pay tax dollars just like he does. And so if I want to use my contribution to those tax dollars to send my child to a private school, then why can't I? You know, you're welcome. I'm not trying to stop you in any way. You're welcome to have whatever, live by whatever value system, ideology you want. My child isn't harming anyone, but I don't want my child having access to that. And I think that's a great solution. And you need to run for the head of our school board, because I think it solves the situation. Let them do what they want to do, we'll do what we want to do. And so, but from a legal standpoint, I think, and I teach this in my education law course, you know, clearly if you look strictly at the law, separation of church and state, the Establishment Clause, public funds should not be used for private schools, regardless of the rationale and how you interpret the law for your desired outcome. If you strict interpretation of the Constitution, that's unconstitutional. That is, it is not a division of church, a separation, of church and state. And so I don't think, and if that goes before the current Supreme Court, it's not going to stand. Well, actually, no, it would, because they're going to want, I take that back. But I do think it's unconstitutional to use public funds for private schools. I think it is too much of an entanglement of church and state. But I wanted to add some credence to your view. One thing I try to do with these types of hot topic situations is to try to put myself in the shoes of the other side, even if I think it's, as my little niece would say, cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, their stance. But I think that the more divisive we are, we don't change hearts and minds. We don't get people to the table. And if that question gets people to the table, for them to see a little more closely when they actually look at the curriculum and the books that they're not harming their child, then I'm happy to have that conversation to get you to the table.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Absolutely.
So this is not necessarily my view. I'm just sort of trying to think about solutions, because it is a really big problem, and everybody sort of encounters it on a regular basis if you're involved in social media. And I agree with you, like in the Carson versus Macon case, that the main school tuition case where they said that, you know, state legislatures can't distinguish between sectarian and non-sectarian schools for determining school public funding with private education requirements. I think school vouchers present some really hairy constitutional issues, because there's not really a good place to draw a line, because, like, you know, historically governments have funded, like, if you're going to give all schools a playground, you got to give the private schools a playground too, sort of thing. And so it is really difficult to draw a line. And so the follow-up question to that, because I'm not sure that school vouchers would solve the divide, because you basically just, if it were a thing, you would take the students who have one view and put them into one type of school. Students that have the other view, put them into a different type of school. And that doesn't necessarily create any sort of bridge between the two, which is sort of seems to be the goal, and it's very admirable to do so, because you want students to have more inclusive conversations and take the other side seriously. And so I don't know if school vouchers are the answer. They're probably not, because of the legal implications of it. The establishment clause is kind of a difficult thing to get around when it comes to public funding of religious private education. So I'm definitely in agreement on that. So that was really more so my question. I'm not sure that school vouchers solve the problem in a way that either side says that it does for one way or the other. So.
This this analogy change your mind? So, you've taken con law already?
Well,
In con law. Have you all covered Plessy versus Ferguson yet?
well, I'm familiar with.
You're familiar with it. So you could say that the proposed school voucher analogy is synonymous with Plessy v. Ferguson,
Right.
separate and equal, but we saw the harm that did, right?
Exactly.
And the reality is if those kids are separated into this private school setting, they're still not being properly educated based on the diverse world in which they're going to have to live in and function in, right? And so it's still doing those students a disservice, if you think about it from that perspective. Even if they're equal facilities, as in Plessy versus Ferguson, Justice O'Connor, one of her famous quotes of one of her opinions is recognizing the educational benefits of diversity. And part of that is also related to the curriculum that you're receiving. And if you're not receiving that exposure in a private setting, it still undermines the whole purpose, of my opinion, of education, which is to prepare you to go out and be actively involved in democracy. And part of that is having the skill set to analyze and consider diverse perspectives. And you can't do that if you are being educated in a bubble, right, or in a tunnel. And so I think the Plessy v. Ferguson analogy hopefully changes. I know you're not speaking personally for yourself, but hopefully changes the dynamics of that proposal and why it still wouldn't solve the issue. Because you're still creating really a bigger divide, right? And we're trying to close the
And
divide.
that does not help the health sphere for those kids in 25 years.
Not at all.
Especially with whatever. Thank you.
Dean Jacobs?
First, I just want to thank the panelists. This has been such a great conversation, and thank you so much. And I have appreciated it as a parent. I have appreciated it as an attorney. I've appreciated it as the dean. I've appreciated it as a professor, wearing all those different hats, and you really covered a lot. As the dean, I started by saying how important it is for us to be able to have conversations, and I wanted to pick up on something Norma said and remind you that 2 weeks from today is election day, and elections matter. Nothing made me more upset when I was reading the Sunday New York Times than to see that people are so disappointed in government that they won't vote. And that there's a sense that people are like, you know what, it's just hopeless, we're never gonna fix it, so what's the point? But the point is, you do need to vote, and you do need to be active in voting for school board elections and voting at all levels up and down the ticket. Our voices, I just moved here, so I made sure that I registered to vote, and then I got on my husband, we argued about it a lot. I made him go to the DMV 4 times because he hadn't had an appointment, and they said they couldn't. Like, no, you will register, you will get your license and register. So October 11th, last day, he did. Because it matters, voting matters, your participation matters. And everything from grassroots conversations like these to voting, we can affect change. It is 2 steps forward, and sometimes it's a giant step back, but we, just as Professor McNeil said, we are making progress, so please, you as law students and then lawyers, your knowledge base, your ability to think through things, we need your participation. We need you to help lead these conversations. That is so critical. So please, November 8th, don't forget.
Well, and don't forget too, I imagine there's probably more than 1 or 2 of you in the room that have future visions of yourselves in black robes. There are about 30 plus judicial races on the ballot here in Jefferson County, so very important.
Do we have any final questions from the audience?
I just want to make a comment. If you would like to see the book Gender Queer, the one that's on the table, it belongs to the law library. And as soon as this is over, I'm going to take it back there and put it on the LGBTQ display that we have in the library. So you all know where the new book displays are, right? Okay, the one on the right with the rainbow colors, that's your place to look, and it'll be sitting there, and you can have a look at it. I did read it, and I thought it was very well done. Beautiful artwork, and really a great autobiography. So I highly recommend it, and it will be there. So.
And going to grassroots, genderqueer you can no longer get on Amazon, not because they won't sell it, but because it's sold out, just like Mouse has sold out. The books that are banned, right, end up getting this huge following, so I'm so glad that you have it here for us in our library. That is great, thank you.
Thank you. And I have to say, we have it because of Scott Campbell,
There
who
he
just
is.
walked in and gave it to
Thanks,
the
Scott.
library, as I was talking to you on the phone Friday.
Oh, yeah,
Scott is
oh, yeah.
There's the book, so,
That's awesome.
yeah.
That's awesome.
So thank you, Scott, also.
Any closing remarks from our fabulous panelists today?
You guys always look at me. They always look at me. I would, my final closing statements would just be to encourage you all that your voice matters, that civic engagement in your community matters, that remember, although we discuss the suppression of speech in the context of school book bannings, it's much larger than that in terms of we want to make sure that our democracy continues to thrive, that our votes continue to matter, that our voices matter. Just remember to stay involved on all levels, and just because you're a student doesn't mean that you can't make a difference in your communities.
I'll say legislators care a whole lot more about what you all have to say than they do about what I have to say. If you all take one day to go to Frankfurt and meet with your state lawmakers, your state senator, your state representative, and you can do it with the Fairness Campaign or many other advocacy organizations. If you don't know the ropes, you can come with us. We have a big rally and lobby day every year. It's February 15th this year. We'll take you there, but you can go on your own time. Nobody does it. You have no idea the massive impact you have by just getting 5 minutes in front of your state senator and state representative in the state capitol in Frankfurt, because nobody goes there. And when they see you walk in the door, they see the 5 people you're going to talk to and the several people that they're going to talk to. They see 25 votes, walk in the door when they have 5 minutes with you, and they're going to listen to you. They're going to listen to you more than they are to a lobbyist. So I agree. Make that impact. You have no idea how powerful you are and how accessible local government is.
I agree with everything that has been said. I'd like to thank you, first of all, for the opportunity to be here today. But when you say your voice matters, it absolutely does matter. And when you say if you go to Frankfurt and talk to the elected officials, they hear differently, and they need to hear all voices. So don't ever turn that opportunity away to use your voice and to encourage others to use their voice. The whole concept of Election Day is a little concerning this year because of the attitude that I just don't like what's going on, so I'm not going to vote. Well, if you don't like what's going on and you don't vote, then you're going to get what you get. So use your authority, your power. Every vote matters. And to go back in history, there was a time that some of us could not get to vote the way we wanted to vote. And John Lewis left us, but he gave us a homework assignment to keep moving forward. It's our responsibility to move forward as a country, as a city, as a state. So please don't ever think that your voice does not matter. It absolutely does. And the thing, as you talk to the folks in Frankfurt, please talk to our students in the Jefferson County Public Schools, because you matter to them also. You are folks that have made it through K through 12 successfully, and now you're in law school, but they need that opportunity to hear your voice and to be around students that are in college. And I appreciate very much what you are doing for Central High School and other programs like that. But please know, I think sometimes people think, well, when I get out of college, then I'm going to do this. Do it now. Let's get started. Do all that you possibly can, because you are the next generation. You will be in charge of this city, this state, this country. So please use your intelligence and your energy to help us thrive and to survive as we go through some of the things that we're going through. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Let's give a round of applause for all of our panelists. Vince, our keeping concierge, has something for you. Thank you for Vince.
Thank you, Vince. We appreciate Appreciate you.
Supporter.
Thank you.
And finally, I just want to thank the audience of the law school and all watching on live stream. On behalf of the Diversity Committee of the Louis D. Brandeis School of Law, have a safe afternoon and enjoy the rest of your week.